Hello, welcome everyone. Ana Maria here. Shay, you go.
Woo! Welcome, welcome.
We're so excited to have you be here for Place at the Table. We are actually going to be in conversation for the next hour, and this platform or this sort of form of conversation started actually exactly a year ago when we all went into lockdown, into quarantine. Contratiempo was looking for ways to sort of create community, and I selfishly was looking for ways to be in adult conversations inside of being quarantined with both my children, and feeling like I just needed to have these spaces of connecting with powerful human beings doing incredible change making work out there. And so I'm super excited to be in conversation with Shay today. So just so you know, this conversation is really about moving with flow. You know, we're not here, it's not going to feel like an interview of either one of us. It really is about just bringing out the power of joy and beauty and what it is to have a conversation and engage in sharing of oneself and with community. And so we are, even though we can't see you, we are excited for you to be a part of this. So if you have comments or questions or things that you're curious about, please be kind of adding to the chat. And as we're talking and as we're engaging, we'll bring you into the conversation in that way. If you notice that something that you're really excited about didn't get discussed, please bring it forth. We are really moving with flow, and you're part of that flow. And then I know there'll be people who are watching this after it's recorded, because it is pre-recorded. And if there are things that you're curious about, we'll make sure that we have our social media handles and information about the work that we do, so that we can both be available if there are other questions or things that you're curious about or want to know more about. So thank you for being here. And the way we always start Place at the Table is I love instead of rattling off people's bios, giving folks the space to just be in the space exactly how you want to be in the space. And so we do that through inviting people to tell us about your story. So Shay, can you just tell us who you are, how you got here, a little bit about your story?
Wow, super big question. Thank you. Well, thanks for inviting me. It's really nice to be in conversation with you and learn from Contratiempo and your work too. So I'm Shay Rivera Rios. I use they, them pronouns. I am originally from Boriquen, Puerto Rico, and I've been living in Narragansett Land in Providence, Rhode Island for the past 10 years now, or 11 years. Time, what is time in a pandemic? Yeah, so I'm an interdisciplinary artist, cultural practitioner. I've been in arts administration for about 10 to 11 years, and just like doing amazing projects that involve magic and imagining and queering space and just creating opportunities for peers and community members to reimagine what our communities and cities can look like. So I'm really, that's kind of like the work that makes my heart beat or skip a beat. Yeah.
Or be faster.
Faster.
I love it. So I can tell a little bit about who I am as well.
Yeah.
We were just saying how in Place at the Table is normally done on IG Live with In Contratiempo's page, and people know who I am. But because I'm here in a new space with new community, I'll share a little bit. My pronouns are she, her. I am Cuban American. I grew up in the South, the child of labor union activists and organizers. So very much rooted in social change specifically, cross cultural, cross race, cross gender, cross economic, social change. The idea of like what happens when human beings come together and fight for justice across lines that normally divide us. And because that was such the root of how I grew up, I always knew that I was going to be having to do something that made the world a better place, whatever direction I wound up going, and art making and moving my body and music and just imagination and creativity were always a part of what made me feel most alive growing up. And so, you know, it was not a hard decision to decide to dedicate my life to both making art and building community. It felt like a natural choice, and a natural, not even sometimes I think it's a choice. It was just a natural, like where I was meant to be. And so I listened to that. I'm also a mother. I have a 10-year-old and a 4-year-old. So that role has been very prominent this last year of being in lockdown with my family. And yeah, just really looking at the way and familying being a verb and an action, and how that act of familying is happening both collectively in my larger chosen family of Contratiempo, as well as in the communities that we work with outside of Los Angeles. Rooted right now for the last 20 years in Los Angeles, but very much, you know, consider myself I really grew up in the South, so there's like a sense of the Southern that I feel connected to, and Contratiempo's work is really started as a reflection of my own artistry and my own desire to sort of create a space to make work, and has really grown so beyond my own individual voice, and it's really become an example for what's powerful and possible when people work in collective together to generate and create inside of spaces of both love and justice, and breakdown and breakthrough, and this idea that, you know, yeah, that art making has really the capacity to build a new world and reframe our narratives moving forward in the future. So just super excited to hear about your work, Shay, because I was like, oh, it's aligned and connected and feels all like we're from the same, you know, familial like stew of conjuring that.
That's a great way to put it. Yes. That's a
The moqueca.
conjuring. I love that.
Yes. So so I would love to hear, I mean, I would just love to hear, I know you mentioned even right off the bat when I was like, is there something you want to talk about? You talked about Fire Flower and Time Machine. Was that something you just
Oh yeah.
like something that you're just like feeling excited about and working on? If you want to share a little bit about that, because I'm curious, I want to hear more about it. I was like, what? That sounds amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, no, like hearing you speak about, you know, what makes your heart beat faster just resonates so deeply, because similarly, like I feel like, you know, coming from Boriquen, Puerto Rico, with a really complex but rich cultural history, and then entering, you know, being in the US and like digging deeper on building, you know, shared journeys with other peers and colleagues of other cultural intersections and gender intersections has been really some of the things that have energized me and inspired me in so many ways, which made my work really inevitable. Like I think, you know, coming from the US's oldest colony that still to this day is colonized. Like I hate when people talk about decolonizing in a really metaphorical way. I'm like, you know,
It's happening now.
it's like no, this is like not this is not a metaphor. I think a few indigenous practitioners have been like trying to articulate that and like get it to drill down on people's heads.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's not a metaphor. I wish I could remember the names, but I will circle back and post them. But it's like, you know, a lot of our communities are, you know, in these situations and have been for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So I connect to the work of Fire Flowers, I think, for a long time. And I just love how you started, you know, sharing why you started A Place at the Table. Mm-hmm. So 4 years ago, I started I was working at AS220, and AS220, it's a cultural, it's an arts nonprofit in downtown Providence. Mm-hmm. And it has multiple facilities for artists to make and create. So I was there for 8 years. But in my path and in my journey there, I created this performance art series. I thought it was really interesting. So I don't come from like, I wasn't like trained in school to be an artist. Mm-hmm. I think, you know, what I've been channeling throughout the years is just voice of ancestors and just like, you know, holding spirit and letting creativity thrive ever since I was little. And then along the way, just learning from other folks and other artists and getting opportunities to learn more. But so I started Luna Loba 4 years ago, and that was an attempt to, I love performance art. I never thought I would love something as weird as performance art. Yeah, but when I first experienced it, it just made so much sense to me because it was about art can be anything, and you can set an intention and you can have a collective act together.
Yeah.
And that can often be connected to space of healing, even though performance art has some problematic pasts. So Luna Loba, I started it because I wanted to build a creative personal space for myself to process my own transformation, going through like a process of trauma and like separation. And I felt like, well, if this is useful to me, it might be helpful for other people. And what it was just like, we would pick, a day during the full moon. Over the span in a year, we did four full moons. And, I would craft prompts based on the Farmer's Almanac, and like to get artists to think about our connection with, the world around us. And then people would perform pieces of any mediums, but mostly performing arts, from 2 to 8 minutes. So it would usually be 12 artists performing per night. It was a lot of ritual work, a lot of weird stuff. It was just like wild and beautiful and amazing. And then just like flash forward, that desire to build creative community in that intimate space blossomed into Fire Flowers last year. I had the opportunity to be in residency with the Wilbury Group, another local theater here as well that does really amazing work. And COVID hit. So that changed everything, the plans for like, producing a new body of work.
Yeah.
And at that point, we were approaching the elections, and, the conversation of like, do I still want to produce something? Just when I sat on that, it just really became evident that I did need to.
Yeah.
Because we were all just feeling so drained and so isolated and so disconnected. We were only just getting all, we're in the, what would they call them? The death scrolls, like the vortexes of negativity. Like everything was awful last year. Yeah. But we were not connecting to each other, which is the way that we replenish. What are folks needing right now? We're not hearing from our neighbors, from the cultural practitioners, from the folks who have been, using their resilient energy across decades and histories of awfulness, right? Who like still be strong and feel powerful and create space of healing.
Yeah.
So that was a really beautiful work. It was a story about a time machine, and the audience convened, an outdoor space to experience an opening of a story, acknowledging our land and our ancestors and where we are, and then go off on small journeys, separated out on 4 groups, to visit different performances that were ancestors or descendants, giving us a piece of wisdom for the moment that we're living in. So, and that was like around 12, like about 15 artists. And it had 5 different stages.
Is this what Kathleen was saying? She was wrapped in a blanket. See?
Yeah. So people had to like go walk along with their own little chair. Some days were like horrifically cold. I thought nobody would show up, but a whole bunch of people showed up with their blankets.
Wow.
We had some heaters, but damn, New England's brutal sometimes. But like 630 people showed up to see this like work over the span of a month, and it just the stories from audiences and artists of how healing it was. Just puts back into perspective what you shared, like how healing it is to have space for creativity and imagining together.
Absolutely.
But tell me more, because you've been doing this work for a long time too.
Well, something that I was thinking of when you were saying it here, by the way, my light went out, so I'm gonna hold on a second. I realized my light, I'm like sitting in the dark. There we go. Oops, hold on. It's like the ring lights. It's so much better. I was thinking of Kanupa Hanska. Have you heard of his work around ancestral technologies? the these indigenous artists. I first heard from Quetzal Flores, who's an incredible community artist here in Los Angeles. I was saying the word ancestral technology, and I literally I never, I don't know why I started saying this word, but I was like the inside of the world that we're living in, there's these ancestral practices that we have that are resilient building, they're resilience building, they allow us to, you know, continue to move forward in this midst of chaos, in the midst of violence, in the midst of trauma, but also leaning and tapping into joy and leaning and tapping into those, you know, that inner light. And so I had said it in conversation, and Quetzal sent me this artist's work, and I was so inspired to like just look and see that there's this, yeah, that this idea that ancestral technology being the sort of undercurrent that's inside of us from these ancestral practices that allows us to continue to kind of do exactly what you did, right? Which is to like create and generate spaces of connection and community. I told you there'd be some buffalo coming behind me. I told you they here. So, you know, so there being this, like, I just hear so much of that when you're saying that, and the people are so hungry for it. They're hungry for remembering, like remembering, right? Like, because it's there inside of us, but it's being able to be in community and practice it that allows us to remember that it's there and remember what those things are. And so even in the way you described like being an artist as something that just like tapping into that ancestry and tapping into those voices and that spirit, I mean, isn't that what art making really is? Honestly, it's like that is like hands down what it is to be an art maker, is to like let go of yourself and like release for there to be things that show up that are so much bigger than you. I just feel like that is so anyway, I just, all of that was like, yes. I mean, so much of our practice also, which was very rooted in live performance before COVID, has definitely shifted, and you know, it was remaneuvering in terms of how we're working inside of different spaces now. As a company, we were very rooted in our education work with schools and young people before we became before it became harder to hold down longer residencies because we were on the road so much. Like, as you know, when we became about 10 years old as a company, we were touring so much that the like 10 to 8 week residencies that we were so used to holding down became a little bit more challenging. And so our work kind of started expanding outside of residency work and moved more into kind of larger residency work in spaces outside of Los Angeles, and then building creative work in LA and like being rooted still in Los Angeles, and like our creative practice being something that is constantly in conversation with community, but also really kind of being driven by and a reflection of where community conversations take us. So COVID made us root back down into where we began, which is the education work. And we've been doing so much more, both work with youth, but also work with in LA County programs around you know, keeping young people out of correctional facilities, and how are we like, how is art making and art engaged experiences for young people, how is that actually preventative in terms of having young people be a part of the system? Which I always love to say, like, that's what defunding the police looks like, right? like actually, if you give money to artists to do the things that we do inside of community spaces and have people remember those ancestral technologies and have access to those practices, that is what defunding the police actually is. That's what centering care actually is. And so, you know, I just loved when you already were like talking about this, because I feel like that's what it is. It's like the swirl of building collective spaces where people feel loved and heard and connected to, and like, and then also like challenged and inspired and livened up, and that's all a part of it's a part of decentering policing and decentering sort of the violence of the justice system that has like kind of been really like closing in on our communities in ways that isn't productive or healthy, or I know what we believe in. So, and I'm saying we because I know already from your work that you don't believe in that either.
No, yeah, I think, yeah, like you know, art is the way. I feel like there's a lot of elitist connotations with art, but obviously, in art, your practice, my practice, practice of our peers, like we dismantle that, like a goal is like to make sure that art is accessible and used as a tool for community empowerment and for like reimagining and rebuilding. At least I feel that way. And also creating space, the spaces that you were describing so well, like spaces of intimacy and truth and like storytelling, like really like how it's like continues to be. You'll probably hear it everywhere. Folks here in this room have heard it 10 million times, or probably are even also involved in this kind of work, but just the power of storytelling. And I think, we specifically saw the power of storytelling wielded in some very brutal and negative ways in the past 4 years with our past administration, and how validating that also is to know there is medicine in this if we use it and wield it toward very intentional goals. So some of the things that I've been talking to young people, students, and other folks whenever I'm in spaces is that, as artists, for now more than ever, like number one, people don't have any excuse anymore to like not know, because we have so many ways of learning, and a lot of BIPOC and QT BIPOC have been teaching folks in new ways and making knowledge accessible for us to reassess our history with this country. But like, what is our role as artists and creatives in the next 10 years, And it is a work that hopefully continues to be acknowledged more, because we don't just put events together, performances together, put an object on a wall. Like our work is a process of, un proceso alquimista of transforming, of transforming all this like knowledge and wisdom and messages and experiences, and showing the world that, like Shamaminda Anosi says, like there's not the danger of a unique story is what got us here, which is the story of white supremacy. Yeah. And it's like, how powerful it is to have, rooms of people where people do feel empowered and to share their truth, and that their truth is acknowledged now as part of our larger narrative of this country. Like thinking about the indigenous sovereignty movements, the Puerto Rican movements, also Black liberation movements that have also given so much energy to other intercultural groups in the past few years. So I've just been thinking a lot about that, like as an artist you create, but it's like either you are, it's like what I've been telling folks, like as an artist, when you create, you support something. So what are you supporting? It's always the case, doesn't matter. Some people say like, I don't, like my work is not political. All creative work is pushing forward some kind of agenda or ideology.
Absolutely. And by not claiming what that agenda and ideology is, it's a very specific choice, and a very specific choice to support what is happening or what is being already put forth. I mean, that's why even inside of the last 4 years of, of 45, the idea of having artists who are saying that I'm making art for art's sake, it's like, absolutely, that is not even possible in this space that we live in right now. And so, yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. I also, I'm so curious, but also so like excited to think about how when you were talking about storytelling, right? And how we're in some ways like our creating is generating new stories of what is possible. Like if we can imagine that storytelling, a lot of times I think the way that we think about storytelling is like talking about the past, right? Things that have happened in the past. But I've been really interested recently and just curious recently about how our storytelling, I think specifically around, because I've been thinking a lot about how we're teaching history to young people, my own children, like explaining this moment to them, explaining what's happening, what has happened in our past and what is happening currently in the present right now. How even just the way we tell the stories of the past are informing the way that we're thinking about the future and what's possible in the future, but that also, like, in some ways, art making is conjuring a new future, is conjuring new stories, is conjuring ways in which stories can be completely transformed from what we've been living in the past. That's not always the way that we need to necessarily define what's possible in the future. And so I also feel like, so the things I've seen that in my internet stalking of you, and also I know the work that Contratiempo that we do is very much, it's about that. It's about, like, how are we coming together as a community, sharing where we came from, but not saying that that's where we're stuck, or that's our only option or our only choice. What are the ways in which we can say, this is actually what we want right now in this moment, that feels really, in some ways, contradictory or completely completely a contradiction of what we've been told is possible in our families, or been told is possible in our community even. How can we conjure something brand new, or that doesn't even, it's in beyond new, right? Like, it doesn't even exist in the realm of possibility, and that's where we put our focus and our energy. And so, yeah, I'm just really interested in that whole thing, like reformulating our DNA through like storying and storytelling in new ways.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, I think, because like we carry so much, like, and like, you know, all these conversations, especially performance and movement artists are having about how we we continue to carry on trauma throughout our generations. It's also been scientifically proven how like our DNA is affected, especially like folks of color, especially like Black women affected by these systems that fail. But I'm super interested in that. I'm also, you know, it's like new is such a word that is an onion to me, because like there is also a process of reclaiming ancestral practices, like you were saying, like the ancestral technologies, and also just learning, you know, right now I'm supporting First Peoples Fund, an indigenous organization in South Dakota, and just learning from their artists, and just how this idea of futurism is so entirely connected to past, but also like in Afrofuturism too, right? But it's like the past and present and the future, we all need to put it together in the stew, like you said, and like look at it and then build from there. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a wonderful process that, you know, artists and young people and, you know, intergenerational spaces create. I want to also like riff off of what you mentioned before of this idea, like, you know, one of the cool things about artists that I feel proud about is that we can remind and inspire people to think differently. Like you were mentioning, like just encourage the world to not accept things as they are, because these systems were imposed on us for specific reasons, for specific gains of like groups of people. So like reminding folks and inspire them and seducing them to want to play and imagine and think things in a different way. And even the same thing, like, you know, rethinking what gender means, rethinking what our identities mean, even also as Latinx people, like really like looking at that and challenging it and questioning it. Like, who are we, you know? Yeah. And like
Blackness and Latinidad, like the deconstructing so many of our, I mean, I feel like there's such deep roots of white supremacy inside of Latinidad that never gets talked about or dealt with. And I feel like for the first time I feel like we are starting as a community, if you could even call it that. I mean, it's so desperate, and there's so many different sort of parts of what it means to be, like you said, Latinidad is not singular, but yeah, how does anti-Blackness show up in our identity, and how is like even just having it being separate than Blackness is inauthentic in itself. So
totally. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, those are big achievements. I feel like there's still a lot of work to do, but I mean, being in this country for 10 years, I mean, obviously acknowledging that I work in, like, I exist in bubbles too. Like, I don't know everything for sure, but like my experience with intercultural groups like ELI, the Intercultural Leadership Institute, and just learning from other people's journeys, just realizing, wow, okay, we really, as communities, we really need to like reevaluate who we are and define that on our terms, because we've allowed other people to define us for us. Specifically talking about like, I'm specifically going to talk now about like Puerto Ricans, like it's like we've long been told who we are, but we also know who we are for real in our own true self. So it's been a really interesting journey to kind of just find genuine space in that.
Yeah, and can I ask you, like, where are the places that you feel like you get to be the most you? Like, what is the
Oh, that's a great question. Oh, amazing. The places where I get to be the most me are places with queer people of color, or like people of color who are artists and are, trying to change the world, or have like a loving rage and outrage of the world. Because I also know a lot of people that are just, content, or, like I say, I know a lot of Puerto Ricans that are very conservative, and I don't share values with them too.
Yeah,
So
loving rage.
yeah, loving rage and using the rage to dance and have joy, and just have a space of building family. Like you were saying, like, building family is important to me, especially as a queer person, and as a person who my blood family is not with me. Like my family is my partner, my spiritual kin, creative, friends who, whenever something bad happens or something good happens, they're there for me and they show love.
So. I love that. And I was gonna say, it's funny because I don't identify as queer, but one of my spaces where I feel like I get to be the most me is queer spaces where people are dancing salsa. like Club Rio in San Francisco, for example. Like,
holy crap, wow, that's amazing.
Places where I can be exactly who I want to be, in terms of I can lead, I can follow, I can dance with whoever I want. There's this sense of like partnership being a fluid following of energy, instead of it being about what are the who are we, and what are the roles that we carry, or the expectations that we have. There's something so freeing and beautiful about that. And so definitely that's one of the spaces. When we were just talking, I was like, that's one of my spaces where I feel like it could be most me. And also with Mother Nature, I feel like, Madre Tierra, like Mama Agua, like being the ocean, being
water, yes.
Water, yes, like rivers. Like, I just feel like there's something so incredibly powerful about both natural bodies of water, but just like even like in the shower, like just the sense of water makes me feel so free, and so much of that remembering and kind of reconnecting to something bigger than myself.
Are you a water sign?
I mean, Yemaya is mi orilla. Yes, I'm actually not a water sign. I'm very Leo, but
I felt I was like, Leo vibe all the way, but I was like, oh, now I feel I need to ask.
No, I think more of like the deep, dark, like intense part of the ocean is more of my vibe. But
yeah.
But
all
yes,
right, fire signs over here. I'm an Aries. Actually, my birthday is like in a few days or something.
Yeah, happy birthday! Happy birthday! I love it. No, I definitely. I also feel like there's this sense of ancestry connected to water too. There's like my grandmother actually just recently passed, and she's always. I mean, she always told me that no matter where she would be in the world, like that I could always go to the ocean and feel her, that she would be there. Like that's where she just felt the most connected, and the most like, this is where I'm always going to be. And and the day after she passed, I went to the ocean, and like I will never forget, like the feeling of her was so strong. It was like she was there. She was literally there. And so also that piece of yeah, my other grandmother is through owls. I experience her all the time through every time I think of her or feel her. It's like you hear woo, woo, or I see an owl, or like or I'll see a you know, picture of an owl, or there's just like the ways that owls come up. And so those little connectors too always make me feel very alive and tapped in. And also, again, that you said it in the beginning of when we first started talking, is like magic. There's something
Yeah.
so incredibly magic about yeah, being willing to kind of open up to the world isn't just what we're seeing in front of us, but there's so many other layers of things that we don't necessarily understand, but we can feel if we're willing to.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that's really beautiful. And I feel like being like a creative person or an artist has given me like the courage to step into that more, you
Mhm,
know, because it's like the allowing yourself to be open to sensing and feeling what's around you and
mhm,
processing that. And like you're saying, like so beautifully, like your grandmother sending you messages from,
mhm,
you know, to another place where she is, just keeping
mhm.
an eye out for you. I mean, I think that's beautiful. And I think that to me is just like always within creative practice, how interwoven it is with like nurturing our spirit.
Yeah.
And like it's like a practice of spirituality in many ways. Like, I don't know, maybe for other folks it isn't, but for me it definitely is.
Mhm,
And that's why I mentioned performance art too, because like performance art, you know, there's a lot of very white male, very patriarchal approaches of performance art where there's a lot of damaging your body or like taking your body to the extreme, which I don't align with. I can
mhm,
see some beauty in that because I feel like that's some kind of masculine energy that needs to reconcile or is trying to understand itself.
mhm,
But you know, like I think in general, the power I see in live performing art, especially performance art, is
mhm,
that we can create a space to share intimacy and mark memory and intention together.
mhm.
And I just see that so connected to spirituality, like how beautiful, you know, to have a space where you can, you know, share your intimate self with others and allow
Yeah,
yourself to receive messages. I don't know. I think
love
it's
that. Well, I also feel like it takes performance art outside of being this, and you mentioned this too, is like an elitist practice of like, you know, I mean, I think my relationship with performance art was very much through that like European lens of, you know, if you don't understand it, then you're just not, you know, sophisticated enough to understand what's happening. And then when I actually, I mean, I don't know if you know Susana Cook, who's she's a does this work Lesbiango Tango, which is like gender bending tango work around taking, like, going to clubs and spaces where you would normally, things would be incredibly gendered and binary, and mixing things up by actually existing inside of a space of performing, even though you don't know she's necessarily performing. There's like a so Susanna was one of the first people who engaged in performance art in this completely different way, which was basically like, how is performance art actually taking what's happening in the world inside of our bodies and actually having us have access to it, and that it's not about spectacle or separation, but that it's actually, like you said, about lived experience. It's like that performance art is like, performance is living. And so that shifted, I think, the way that I thought of it as something that was like separate from me and apart from me. And I love that it's building rituals where people can create moments in time where they feel connected and feel
yeah.
alive and feel, you know, more themselves.
Absolutely. And there's a magic to the world making, right? And I'm sure you see it in your work with the work that artists that you support as well. But it's like you create a small bubble of an imaginary world and how powerful that is, you know? Like
Mhm,
it's like, you know, and but I did want to talk with you about something about that and pose a question. You know, a lot of I've folks have asked me this before, but I think it became like it was blasted all over when the whole American Dirt fiasco came up. but it's like that thin line of imagining and creating versus like, you know, co-opting stories of other people, which
Mhm.
is something that, you know, comes up for me and for other folks in conversations. I
Mhm.
think, you know, people like showing, you know, vulnerability and their fear of being like, oh, I don't want to co-opt. It's like, well, if you follow your voice, you're not co-opting. Now, if you're taking somebody else's experience deliberately and packaging it as your own, then
Mhm.
that's different.
Yeah.
Like, you know, so I was wondering, like, what did you thought about that, like, as a topic of like, you know, storytelling and imagining, but then like authenticity or, you know, identity?
So great. I love this question, and I don't get a lot of time and opportunity to talk about it publicly. We talk about it a lot as a company, and have not and have been actually. There's been like pre-COVID, there was some major struggles that happened within Contratiempo where there were there was like some major pushback around people feeling like they're sharing their stories and not feeling like their stories were being honored in the way that they needed to be honored. And that's obviously a huge problem, and we're like, okay, that's not okay, because that's not who we are, that's not what we say we are, that's not who we believe we are. And so we started kind of like unpacking that and doing a lot of the work, including myself, kind of looking at, okay, so I started this organization very much from my own story, right? Like from my own experience of feeling like I didn't exist inside the world in the way that I could be my whole self in these places of art making and art making, but also art sharing. Like I could always be a salsera over here, or I could be a, you know, a theater of the oppressed, you know, sort of like community activist, theater activist over here, or I could be you know, a modern dancer, a Dunham practitioner over here. But there wasn't a space where like all of it could, or I could be a community organizer over here, but dance would be extra. And there wasn't a place where I felt like all of it could exist simultaneously. And so that's why I founded Contratiempo, because I wanted a place where the artist, the activist, the person who is from the in between, you know, I'm not Latina enough, I'm not American enough, I'm not like the, you know, like all of the places of like that felt like they were never either or, but we're all about the space of in between could actually exist. The contratiempo, right? The offbeat,
Yes.
the beat between the beats. So so that desire to create something that was really rooted in my own story and my own struggle and my own desire to make space for myself grew to be something so much bigger, because I was really interested in not just my story. I'm interested in how we hear one another's stories in our reflections of each other, and how if I share my story authentically, do you then learn something about your own story and have space and permission in a different way to be able to be more fully yourself, right? Like what are the ways in which our sharing directly impacts each other's sharing? And I think as the company continued to evolve and I was no longer performing because I had my two kids, and I was literally like, okay, all the crazy things that I want to like I see in my head that I want to have happen are not happening on my own body in the same way. So, so let me back up and let some of these other youngins come in here and do some of this crazy stuff that I'm imagining. And part of that also was really inviting people to bring their own stories and their own reality. So like we started as like a salsa Afro-Cuban contemporary dance company, but then moved into like there are, you know, people we brought in were like steppers or house dancers or capoeiristas or all these other forms that were in the diaspora but also beyond my own body, right? And so as a company and as a collective we started like excavating those places and where we all connected, or the places in which we found, you know, shared resilience practices. And there's a lot of power and beauty in there. And there is the space of like, okay, we are functioning in a capitalist society where, you know, art making is connected to sustainability, like people's capacity to be sustainable. The idea of like the economics of when we create a project, you know, like where's the money going, who is the money going to, all of those questions. And so it became something so much bigger than just like art making. It became like, how are our practices in hiring? How are our practices in paying people? How are our practices in valuing people's time and crediting and like naming all of the elaborate collaborative processes that have to be gone through to be able to create something? Like, how are we naming those things? And so I share all of this because I feel like it's all a part of this, right? That it has become bigger than my story. It has become something so much, so much more amplio than one singular person. And I still, in the work, I've realized how critical it is for me to still have my story be a part of every single thing that we do. Because if it isn't, then that's what it becomes. Then it becomes me on the outside curating other people's stories. So, Joyous Justice is an example of like, we made the entire piece, and Toledo, one of my incredible company members who, she was like, at the end, she was like, Ana Maria, like we're watching it and I don't hear you or feel you. And like, I don't see your story. And your story was a part of our like creative process and all the conversations and all that, but where is it in there? And she was right. And so we had to go back, and I made this voiceover and connected it to like one of the pieces that was happening. And then we like, generated it and sort of like wove it in. And it made it make sense, because it was like, yes, you're right. Like, I have to make sure that the micro is in relationship to the macro, right? Like that individual story isn't it's not about excavating other people's stories. It's about all of us sharing who we are and where we come from, and being able to do that. So anyway, I share that like long answered.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's perfect.
But I think it's something that we as a company are continually doing that work. So it's not, and that work looks different throughout different parts of who we've been in the last 15 years. I mean, we've been around for 15 years, which is tremendous. I mean, we were like literally a teenager as an organization. And right now, what that work has been looking like for the last year is really looking at how white supremacy culture has like been the water that we're all swimming inside of having these radical practices that are connected to ancestral wisdom, that are connected to like deconstructing white supremacy, but we're in white supremacy. And so what are the ways in which unintentionally we're reinforcing things that we actually are trying to tear down or don't believe in? And so we've been doing as a company the work of like, we have weekly meetings where we read and we argue and we teach and we share when we have guest artists. We should have you come in sometime, but like we do all kinds of different things in these meetings. But one of the things we've been doing is like just unpacking like the onion, like laying back the layers of white supremacy, and what are the ways that we're actively dismantling it and we feel great about, and that's happening. And then what are the ways then like that are just like uncovering these ways in which we're actually reinforcing things that we don't believe in. And so it's been so helpful in our teaching, in our performing, in our engaging as a collective. And also the work's never done. Like it's not like you're like, okay, great, we did that, that's good. No, it's like the never ending onion. It's like one of those like infinity onions. So I'm curious, I want to ask the same question back at you. Like, what is that? How does that look in your work?
Yeah, I think similar, like the structures that I've created inside and outside organizations to collaborate with other peers and folks are more like collaborative structures. Like I think about, and this was another question, but I can speak to this too, but like the role of an artistic director, like what does that really look like? What does collaboration really mean? Because people throw the word collaboration around a lot, but we don't spend enough time mulling over it. I mean, just hearing the process that you have is amazing. Like mulling over it, educating, reading, like arguing, not arguing maybe, but like challenging each other, growing.
Argue.
Great, even better. But yeah, no, like creating structures where like people ask me, like, I've had projects where people ask me like, oh, who are the artists that you're going to select or work with? And I'm like, I don't work like that. Like, I don't select necessarily people. Like, and I also don't just make up relationships. Like the people I work with, are friends and collaborators that I love. And that's been a process of developing relationships over years. So we know our work as independent artists, and we've collaborated in different ways. So really looking at, my practice really is one of like, weaving myself in relationship to other people, and other people supporting their work and getting to know them. And then creating structures where, all right, we know each other's work. Now let's look at this structure, prompt, theme, story. How do we want to build inside it together so that all the voices are heard and have autonomy, riffing off of each other? So, something that's really part of me, but it's not very public, or like I don't really do it in order to go out and do things. Like I'm a I guess musician is a really heavy word. I have a lot of respect for musicians. But I've been a drummer for about 15 years now, and have been in collaborative space with other musicians of so many different walks of life, so many different genres and instruments. And I think that kind of vocabulary, or like language, shows up in my practice with curating and collaborating with other people, because it's more like creating having a dialogue between our own creative practices. But then that thin line of some folks, I've had some really great conversations with other folks, like my colleague Yara Lisiaga in Boston, another Boricua, Anabel Vasquez, otra Boricua, like, and just other folks who lead curatorial work or community projects. And where's that line between you being director and like giving other people power, or allowing a more collaborative shared power to exist? And and sometimes people who choose or assume leadership roles not wanting to fully claim the fact that they have power, and how that sometimes can be damaging too.
Absolutely.
Like, if you're the director, you name it, you're the director, and then let's together create how we build space together in the best way. Because, and in many other projects, like, I don't want to be director. I just want to like sit and chill. It's like sit and chill and support you, like, so kind of like that interchangeable role, which I feel like you named it, like fly. I was thinking about flocks of birds. It's like you fly around together, like build things.
Absolutely. Well, and it's something. Well, I think I love that so much. And I think that so much of that journey is also, I feel like I actually learned a lot about what leadership is, and what my role as a leader is inside of this this space of Contratiempo. That has been built over the last 15 years, but really, like I said, has evolved and is now in a place where I think I had gotten to a place as a director where I was really directing, but I was also I was forgetting like my deep desire to like perform and engage and be an artist. And because it was so easy to like, not easy, let me take that back. Nothing's easy. That's not the word. Easy is not the right word. It felt like a slippery slope. It was almost like it was actually hard not to fall back into like holding up and supporting the organization as like my main role for so long, because in order for us to function, in order for to pay artists, in order for us to like keep building work that I believed in, we had to have this kind of like, somebody had to be there like holding it. And I have a partner now, Jessica Amaya, who is an incredible managing director and who is holding so much of that and loves it, like loves that work, is not trying to like, I'm like the arts administrator that doesn't want to be an arts administrator. She's like an arts administrator that loves arts administration, and so like to find someone like that who loves to create systems and to create support and to like help create a foundation that's going to really help to hold the goal of this vision. it's allowing me to get to make more and to play more and to admit that like I'm a visionary artist and I have really clear ideas and things that I want to create and see in the world. And I want to play with, like you said, people who I just really love working with and who respect deeply as other artists and whose ideas I think will challenge and blow up my own ideas in ways that like and the same thing that I'll do for them. Like there's this way that synergy happens when we come together, that we create something that wouldn't be possible with us as individuals. And so there's a way that in the last, I would say like 6 months, the projects that I've been working on and that we've been creating, some of them with me as an individual artist and some of them with Contratiempo as this collective of incredible human beings that I feel so blessed to get to call family. There's this way that that feels more clear than it ever has. And I think even if you had talked to me a year ago, I think I was in a more of an artistic director role of holding in a way that didn't feel like actually living my light or living what my truth, or the place where I asked you the question, like, where are you your most you? I wasn't feeling like my most me, but I feel like I'm figuring that out more, and through that, the relationships then that I'm building with other artists feels more, like you said, like it doesn't feel it doesn't feel like strategic. It feels like it's just like things are emerging out of what feels good and it's like it's the following pleasure, following joy as your compass.
That's beautiful. I love that because those kinds of ways of working are not often recognized or validated or like people don't immediately identify them. Well, unless they're doing the work. If you're doing this kind of work, then you immediately see it when people are doing it. But it's just like to run an arts organization, an arts collective, or an arts project of whatever scale. Like many of us bring so much wealth and richness that comes from a place of connecting as humans. And it's not just a spreadsheet. It's not just a timeline. It's not just, shoot me a plan for the next 2 years. It's like, they're amazing tools too. And cool, but like, that's not how the real work happens,
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've had a really rich trajectory of successes, and also probably a lot of people questioning like your or your power, even like as like a strong Latina woman.
Totally.
And I think about that, those moments in which I've been really clear on what I'm doing and how I'm aligning it, and then folks who do not understand the work but feel like they have some kind of claim to power, like throw arrows at it or question it. And it's like, no, this kind of work is it's cultural work.
Yeah.
It's not management work in the traditional sense. It's like, I would say, organized cultural work.
Yeah.
All cultural work is organized, but
well, it's cultural organizing.
Organizing.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Oh my God, Shay, I can literally talk to you for like 3 more hours. I was like, I just looked at the clock. I was like, oh, we are so at time. And I literally feel like we have like 10,000 more hours to talk. So what needs to happen is clearly we need to talk more.
Well, now we're connected. So also look like there's a shout out to Kaisha Johnson from Women of Color in the Arts. So much love to you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yes. And
Anabel was here.
No, we've had so many beautiful comments, and I've been so in the conversation that I'm like now just looking at them. Thank you all so much for being here. And Shay, just thank you for the work that you're doing and who you are in the world. And I'm really excited to also know you and know your work, because I know that there are going to be intersections and ways that we're going to be connecting in the future. So just feels so.
Absolutely.
Thank you, First Works, for making this happen.
Thank you, First Works. Thanks so much, Ana Maria. I'm so psyched that we're connected now.
Yes.
World, watch out.
Yes, cuidado, cuidado.
Cuidado, cuidado.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a beautiful, beautiful afternoon and day or night or wherever, whatever time it is, wherever you are.
Bye.